Well, good morning on behalf of the United States Institute of Peace and POMED, Project on Middle East Democracy. I'd like to welcome everyone to this discussion of human rights in Tunisia. My name is Dan Brumberg, and I serve as an advisor on democracy-related programs here at USIP, and also I co-direct democracy and governance studies at Georgetown University. We are delighted to have this opportunity to discuss the issue, the complex issue of democracy and human rights in Tunisia. And I want to, before we get into the substance of today's discussion, I want to offer a special thanks to Ricky Goldstein, our colleague from Human Rights Watch, for helping to make this possible, and Steve McInerney from POMED. We have been working with POMED now for, I think, a good 3 years on various projects, well before the Arab Spring actually sprung. So, and POMED assisted us and worked with us closely, most recently, on a project in which we hosted 8 Tunisian academics and began a discussion and a project focusing on the prospect of creating a Center for Democracy Studies at Tunis University. So USIP has been active in that arena, and we are looking at a whole series of other projects on issues of political and democratic change in Tunisia. So we are delighted to have this opportunity to hold this discussion, a discussion which could not be more timely because, as we all know, the Arab Spring, or the series of Arab revolts, as I prefer to call them, rebellions, began in Tunis and in Tunisia, or Tunisia to be more specific, not Tunis. And it was a bellwether for the entire region. In this regard, the current debates in Tunisia about human rights echoes a far wider debate that we find throughout the Arab world about how to define those rights. And we might, for simplicity's sake, simply suggest, although this is a simplification, that the debate falls along 2 parameters: those who want to define human rights more closely based on international standards and based on individual rights, versus those who prefer or gravitate toward more communal or collective notion of human rights, or believe that personal and individual rights should be subject to certain kinds of communal notions of identity. And those are sort of 2 concepts. It's a debate we find in Tunisia, and it's certainly a debate we find throughout the Middle East and certainly beyond as well. And we can say, again, for simplicity's sake, that if you read the most recent iteration of the Tunisian constitution, which I have looked at both at its Arabic and its French versions, I haven't seen the English yet, but it's very interesting, because if you read the preamble and then you read other articles, you see both concepts of human rights are represented in that document, and that, to some extent, represents an effort at compromise. It represents an effort to bring these 2 concepts together, and certainly from my point of view, the Constitution that you have now produced is a considerable improvement over the previous 2 iterations, but that is in the eye of the beholder. There's no question about that. So in many respects, the issue of the Constitution and the way in which those 2 different concepts of human rights are represented is emblematic of a much wider discussion in Tunisia that is now going on. And to help us make sense of that discussion and to help us give more precise definition to what it means in terms of Tunisia's transition to democracy, and here we have to say that there is no doubt in my mind that of all the countries who have seen the upheavals of political rebellion, Tunisia represents the one Arab country where there has been clearly the most progress. We have to get into the nitty-gritty of what this sort of debate means in terms of the actual process of democratic transition in Tunisia. So to help us make sense of this, we're delighted to have 2 colleagues from Tunisia, and who will speak, each of whom for about 10 to 12 minutes at the most. We will start with Amel Azzouz, who is deputy at the Tunisian National Constituent Assembly, a member of Ennahda's Internal Shura Council, and therefore Mrs. Amel has practical experience on the floor of the parliament, as it were, in dealing with the whole question of the debate over human rights. And remember the you remember the commission, and while your actual training is not in the area of human rights, you have been part of the debate. So we're eager to hear from you as to how you view that debate and how you view the progress, as well as how you view the challenges. And then we have Amna Goualali from the Human Rights Office in Tunisia, a country representative for Human Rights Watch. Somebody we have finally met after communicating by email and by phone for the last year and a half. And Amna will give us her perspective on that debate as well, and give us a sense of where she thinks progress has been made and what are the challenges. So each of you will have 10 to 12 minutes at most. And then we will have our two colleagues, Stephen McInerney from POMED, give us his sense of that debate, and Joyce Cassie from USIP. Joyce has recently spent some time in Tunisia, and she had an opportunity to meet with a whole series of civil society groups, and Joyce will give us her sense of the implications of this discussion for sort of the issue of civil society, and then we'll open it up to a wider discussion. We need to make sure that Amna can get a taxi out of here at 11:25. She has a 12 o'clock train. USAP does not want to be responsible for you missing your train. I think that will wreck the whole democratic transition in Tunisia. We have to be careful about that, or at least could negatively affect it. So we're going to make sure that you will leave and we will continue our discussion. So don't feel that you have to hesitate. We are organizing a cab for you to get you directly to the train station. So Amel, why don't we start with you? Take 10 to 12 minutes and give us your sense of the achievements as well as some of the remaining challenges.
Thank you, Daniel. Good morning, everybody. Before I start, I'd like also to introduce another guest we have here from Tunisia. He's the vice president of the NCA in charge of the civil society, of the relationship with the civil society. So he'll be of great help also if ever we start the discussion concerning updating the situation, the political situation in Tunisia, or even the drafting process. He's here, Mr. Badruddin Abdel Kafi. He's not a panelist with us, but he's there to help and to intervene. So thank you again, Daniel. Thank you, Joyce. And thank you, Stephen, for allowing me this occasion to be here with you, and for allowing me this occasion to be in the U.S. Institute of Peace. As Daniel has already mentioned, because I am a deputy in this NCA, and particularly I'm a member of one of the most important commission or committees, that is of the preamble and the basic principles or fundamental principles and the amendment of the Constitution. So I'll be much more focusing on the question of human rights and liberties in the Constitution itself, especially in the final draft, the draft of April 22nd, 2013. So as you all know, Tunisian people achieved a peaceful, exemplary revolution that dethroned a dictator who confiscated rights and liberties, a dictator who fought the different opinion, encouraged corruption, and practiced the policy of regional marginalization. Thereby one of the tasks, if you want, or one of the major tasks our people gave us the responsibility of carrying out when they elected us October 2011, was drafting or is drafting a new constitution for this country that cuts with any system of dictatorship and corruption. The last, I hope, also the last draft, and I hope the final draft of April 2013 contains, as far as I can see, strong affirmations that would make of it a constitution worthy of the Tunisian revolution and Tunisian people. First of all, this draft establishes the civil state, a state of law and institution, the state built on citizenship and equality. This draft also states different rights and public and individual liberties. Let me just mention here and cite 48 articles among 139. 48 of them are, if you want, focusing on rights and liberties, 48 of them. It underlines that the judiciary is a separate power and establishes real guarantees for its independence, the independence of the judiciary. This draft also decides to establish a constitutional court as the best guardian of the constitutional text. It also establishes independent democracy backing constitutional committees. You know, these are committees, independent committees to back democracy in the country. Let me just mention 3 of them. They are, in fact, they used to be 5. Now, in the final draft, they are 3. One, and most important of them, is the High and Independent Committee of the Human Rights. Another one is the Media Committee, and another one is the Election Committee, or Commission, if you can call it. So this also draft aspires to adopt. Why am I saying aspires? I would explain afterwards, because this question is still in debate, in continual debate between different parts. This question of the system, the political system in Tunisia. It aspires to adopt a political system that cuts with a possible return to dictatorship, and which also achieves, if you want, balance between powers. So it organizes, this draft organizes local authority in a way that ensures more decentralization and to get rid of regional imbalance and disproportion. You know that disproportion and imbalance among region was one of the reasons behind this revolution. Human rights in Tunisia's transition now. So there are certainly some gaps, if you want, here, if you can call. But we should understand, all of us, that transition is still in move. It is still in its beginning. Transitions take time. These gaps or these infringements, if you want to register them here and there, remain limited and passing. As in fact, the present political will of those who govern Tunisia nowadays, their purpose is expanding. Their will is to expand, is expanding liberties and protecting rights as much as possible. It's true that there was a revolution in Tunisia. There was a revolution in Tunisia, but reform and change need a long time. All the institutions in Tunisia need reform. They are recovering. All the institutions are recovering after, let's say, more than 50 years of dictatorship, of corruption, of oppression, of all of this. After more than 50 years, now all the institutions in Tunisia are, if you want, getting better. They are recovering. They are learning. Everybody is learning in Tunisia. So security institution needs reform. The judiciary institution needs reform. The institution of media needs reform. We hope that, just between parentheses here, the recently established media committee, independent media committee and provisional media committee would help do this reform. Nobody can deny that in addition to the many other laws also need reform. Nobody can deny that in addition to the actual state, there is also what you call the deep state, still holding and occupying key positions. A deep state well positioned in the country. That is how people now in Tunisia, those who live in Tunisia or those who visit, feel that there is sort of perpetuation of old practices. There are practices which still continue, there is certain perpetuation of practices of the past. Let me finish with this. I say the Constitution is important. A law-abiding, hard-working government or state is important. But if we want real change and real improvement at the level of the respect of human rights and liberties, we need to work on the following. Implement the transitional justice law, the law of transitional justice as soon as possible. Engage in the reform of laws, reform the educational system. Change starts by strong legislation. Yes, that's true. It starts by strong legislation and clear legislation, but also we need also to change mentalities. We need to change, and this, of course, needs strenuous work on various levels. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Okay, terrific. Off to a good start. Okay.
Well, thank you very, very much for inviting me here. Thanks for the USIP and POMED for organizing this conference, which helps bringing back Tunisia under the spotlight because, of course, like there are so many developments in the region that have taken back the light from Tunisia, which is the first country to have sparked the Arab Spring. But I think it's very important that we focus back on it because the success of Tunisia's transition will usher also a new era, I think, for the whole entire region and will be echoed in the entire region. So I would like to start by giving a broad and very brief overview about the situation of human rights and the general context of Tunisia today, be it through focusing on the positive and also the more negative developments, before then focusing more on the constitution and the constitution drafting process, because I think this is really a very important topic that is now gaining traction and having a lot of discussion inside Tunisian society about the constitution. So for the general context of human rights, I think Tunisia is often, or Tunisia's transition is often portrayed as the most successful and the most positive transition in the region, and one which has the most likelihood of success given the country's assets. The country is, of course, considered as an educated, there is an educated society, a highly educated society with the lowest rates of illiteracy in the region. It's a homogeneous also population with a majority of Sunni Muslims, so there is less risk of, you know, sectarian strife or clashes between different groups with like ethnic, from ethnic origins or religious origins. It's also a small country with no real history of violence. I mean, the violence that has taken place in Tunisia, even during the fight for the independence, was quite limited and was not the kind of violence and the kind of death toll that we have seen in other parts of the region during the fight for the independence. So obviously, when we compare Tunisia to Libya and Egypt, the transition seems better off. There is an inclusive constitution drafting process that has brought together an array of parties representing divergent views and divergent ideologies inside the Tunisian society. There is also, as a second positive aspect of Tunisian transition, is that there are sustained efforts for institutional reform and for transitional justice. These are the very positive aspects and aspects that single out Tunisia when we compare it with other countries in transition in the region. An inclusive drafting process, constitution drafting process, including different ideologies, different ideological groups, and then efforts for transitional justice and also for institutional reform. I think, however, that such a portrait sidesteps many of the risks and difficulties of Tunisia's transition, because Tunisia's transition is facing growing challenges. I think among them, the first and foremost is obviously the security situation. As armed groups are stepping up their operations in Tunisia with very worrying circulation of arms. There is every now and then there is a discovery of arms, deposits that might in the future lead to escalation of violence. There is unrest, a situation of unrest also on the border with Algeria, with the discovery of clashes between armed groups and the army and the National Guard. I think also another aspect of the challenges and the difficult situation through which Tunisia is going right now is that the economy is in tatters. There is a harsh economic situation which is really taking its toll on the poorest and the most marginalized segments of society, which increases their grievances and fuels social unrest. And in addition to that, all these demands that were at the heart of the uprising and of the revolution are still unmet. I think that when we take these 2 years of the transition, we see that unemployment is hovering. There is disparity between regions, which is still glaring, and nothing really substantial has been done to address the socio-economic grievances that have sparked the revolution. And I think this is really at the heart of the uprising, and still is there is risk of further unrest if these demands are not really addressed in a substantial and comprehensive way. Of course, there are very important achievements and gains of the transition phase. And I think first and foremost of these gains are the fact that there is much more space for freedom of expression, association, and assembly, which are the basic fundamental freedoms necessary in every democratic society. There is also a blooming and very vibrant civil society group that is fighting inch by inch in order to protect the rights and the gains of the transition phase and of the revolution. There are also laws that gave a partial reform of the old repressive legal framework, especially for media and freedom of the press, the law on political parties, the law on associations. All these laws were adopted after the revolution in July 2011, and they have reformed the legal framework that was very repressive for freedom of assembly and freedom of expression, etc., but only partially. So now these gains and achievements are still very fragile because of the delay in starting really meaningful and comprehensive institutional reforms in the judiciary and in the security sector. Now, after this broad overview, I would like to turn to the Constitution of course, I share some of the conclusions that Mrs. Azzouz has given us about the Constitution drafting process and about the fact that there are an interesting Bill of Rights, let's say, in the Constitution, that there is a whole chapter which is dedicated to rights and freedoms and laying out many of the rights, fundamental rights that are important for Tunisian citizens. However, I think I will have a more critical, of course, overview or overlook on the Constitution, because I think the Constitution, as it stands now in its third draft, which was released in April 2013, is, of course, the result of compromises between varying and opposing forces. And broadly speaking, of course, it's between the conservatives and the progressives, between what we call the Islamists and their allies, and the more secular political parties. So the Constitution here, as we see it, dovetails divergent and sometimes antagonizing views about human rights, about politics, about rule of law. And that's why we find a lot of contradictions in the current draft, which is before us now, and which is obviously has a lot of improvement if we compare it to older drafts of the Constitution, but it still encompasses several loopholes that could be used in the future by future rulers to undermine human rights and restrict them on several bases. So I think a cursory look at the Constitution does not really give the breadth of the problems when it comes to human rights. The Constitution has, as I said, an entire chapter on rights and freedoms, including civil and political, social and economic rights that Tunisians fought for during decades. Its preamble states, as Amel rightly said, that it's aiming at wielding a democratic, participatory, and republican regime based on the will of people, which is really a good language and something which signals the will of the Tunisian rulers to have a democratic system. So on the face of it, it's a constitution which sends, let's say, reassuring messages and that does not ring alarm bells like the other ones in the region. However, when you start digging deeper in the meaning of the words and concepts which are used, you will realize there are very problematic provisions. There are gaps in rights protections and contradictions also between concepts that would, in the future, could torpedo the very meaning of the Bill of Rights. And I would like here to stress the fact that these provisions need to be read in conjunction and not in isolation. So if you take article by article, you might not have a real vision of some of the problems and gaps and contradictions that exist in the Constitution and that could have a different impact on rights if you read it in separation. If you read it in conjunction, if you read the whole draft, I think you realize more, obviously, like that there are some real problematic issues there. So I think for our perspective, I think that there is a lot in this constitution of wiggle room for future legislators and judges to empty the rights of their meaning and interpret them in a way inconsistent with the human rights. And I would like to show how this is possible. Of course, first of all, when you start with the preamble of the Constitution, which states that building on the fundamentals and the open and moderate objectives of Islam, on sublime human values, and on those universal human rights that are in harmony with the Tunisian people's cultural specificity. I mean, this last sentence about cultural specificity was added in the third draft after there was pressure from civil society groups and opposition parties who were very much advocating for a reference to universal human rights, to a reference to Universal Declaration of Human Rights. However, the formulation as it stands now, instead of upholding universal human rights, subjects them on the opposite to cultural specificities, which is a very vague and loose concept that could mean anything for future rulers and could be used in order to empty the rights of their very meaning. I think also the place of Islam in the new constitution has raised a lot of discussion inside Tunisian civil society groups and political parties, and adds also to the risks that we have seen with these cultural specificities. You know that Article 1 of the Constitution, which was the subject of a consensus from the different political parties, which was also taken from the previous Constitution of 1959, which stated that Tunisia is a free, independent, and sovereign state, point. Its religion is Islam, its language is Arabic, and its form of government is a republic. So the consensus around this interpretation of this article, which goes back, as I said, to 1959, to the first constitution, was that it had a more sociological or descriptive meaning than a normative meaning, which basically means that it described not Tunisia as an Islamic state, but the majority of Tunisian people in being Muslims. However, when we read further down the constitution, the draft constitution now, the third draft, and it was already something which was encompassed in the previous draft, we see that Article 136 of the constitution states that there cannot be revisions related to Islam as the religion of the state, which gives a much more different perspective on Article 1. And it's obviously taking us back to another idea, to the idea of Sharia law, to the idea of an Islamic state, which is completely different from the meaning or the agreed upon meaning that was in the Article 1 of the Constitution. So I think this provision, even if it is left like this in the Constitution right now, is problematic and is difficult, might be difficult to reconcile with some of the human rights in the future, because we don't know what the interpretation of Islam as the religion of the state will be. It's also leaving a lot of room for interpretation which are opposite to human rights. We know that Sharia law or Islam as being the religion of the state can mean from, you know, the very theocratic state to something which is very, very different, something which is more in conformity with democratic and human rights values. But this is compounded. I think the existence of these, you know, formulations in the Constitution is even compounded by the fact that there is no real or clear reference to international conventions of human rights ratified by Tunisia as being part of the law of the state, because the Constitution as it stands now says that international conventions ratified by Tunisia have supremacy on the national law, but are under the Constitution, don't have supremacy for the Constitution, which is very, very normal in all countries. Of course, international conventions are under the Constitution. However, there is no clause which says that Tunisia upholds the international conventions that it has ratified and make these conventions the law of the state or part of the law of the state. So in addition to the very vague wording in some that I have just described in relation to cultural specificities, to Islamic law, or to Islamic religion being the religion of the state. In addition to that, there is a gap in the constitution concerning international conventions of human rights ratified by Tunisia. Just one word, there are also remaining issues when it comes to the Bill of Rights, because that's also something which we have noticed that it's not complete, and there are some major rights and major freedoms which are not encompassed in this Bill of Rights or chapter on rights and freedoms. Mainly is the freedom of thought and freedom of conscience, because the article on freedom of belief, as it is written now, is very, very limited, and the context, the semantic context of the article might address only freedom to believe in God or freedom of religion, not the broader freedom of thought, the freedom not to uphold any religion, the freedom to change religion, etc. This is not really clearly stated in the Constitution, and I think all these elements added together, if we see them in conjunction, as I said before, might signal a different, give a different perspective on the reading of the Constitution. Thank you very much.
Terrific. Thank you very much. I think that what we'll do is, since you have to leave early, and I'm sure Amel wants to engage in some of the points you made, to give you an opportunity a little later to do so. But some of it may happen when you're gone, but we'll be very fair to you even in your absence. I want to recognize and say how much we appreciate that Ambassador Mukhtar Chouachi is here with us today. Welcome to USIP. We are delighted to have you. We mentioned at the start of our program that we had about a month ago a group of Tunisian academics here to spend a week with Georgetown University and USIP looking at the possibility of creating a Center for Democracy Studies in the heart of the Tunisian university system. And so we're looking forward to that, as well as other programs and efforts to work with our colleagues in Tunisia on assisting you and providing you whatever help we can as you tackle these important challenges. I was reminded, when you were talking about the loopholes in constitutions, when I lived in Egypt, they used to tell a joke that was actually a version of the joke that was told in the Soviet Union. The joke went, what is the difference between the American Constitution and the Egyptian Constitution? Both, of course, guarantee freedom of speech. The American Constitution also guarantees freedom after speech. And that is, of course, the critical question, whether there are loopholes in the Constitution such that your freedom to say what you want is then conditioned by other articles that might be interpreted to provide no freedom after speech, as we understand what that means. And I think one of the issues raised by your presentation, which we can talk about, is of course the role of the judiciary, because ultimately you have now the creation of a Supreme Court, which will have a critical role in interpreting what those things mean. And that could play in different ways. So that obviously is an issue. So let us go on with our discussants. Steve McInerney from POMED will speak about 5 or 6 minutes, drawing on his perspective on this debate, particularly in light of your recent trips to Tunisia, and then Joyce will do the same. So Steve, thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Dan. I'll keep my remarks brief, and I'm looking forward to hearing a kind of discussion and back and forth after this. I would begin by saying that I fully agree with what's already been said about the importance of Tunisia's transition and the importance of trying to draw some attention back to Tunisia that's been taken away by events elsewhere in the region. I would also underscore many of Amel's remarks, sort of outlining Tunisia's advantages that it has over many of its neighbors. And I think it is clear that while there have been some difficulties encountered, in the past several months, in the past year, it's still certainly the case that Tunisia has made more progress in its transition than any of its neighbors, any of the other countries that have entered transition along with following the protests of the Arab Spring. Despite this, I've made probably half a dozen trips to Tunisia since the revolution, and my last trip there was about a month ago. And despite the progress that's been made, I would say that the general mood in Tunisia among the population now is quite negative, and it's quite pessimistic. And I was struck a month ago when I was there by the sort of lack of confidence and lack of trust in the process and in the trajectory of the transition. And I feel like there are sort of three main groups of people that I interacted with when I was in Tunisia. There are the government and its supporters, the opposition and its supporters, and then I think the third and the largest group is the majority of the population that seems to be frustrated with both the government and the opposition, and seem to be, what I heard quite a lot was that by sort of, average Tunisians, is that they feel as though both the government and the opposition throughout this process seem to be thinking of their own political interests ahead of the interests of the people of Tunisia. One thing that was alarming that I heard a number of times on my most recent visit, and had not heard previously in just sort of small talk with random Tunisians, was that they were unhappy with where things were going, to the degree that they felt as though things were better under Ben Ali. And I felt as though that kind of rhetoric is cause for serious concern. And while Ms. Amel talked about the enormous sort of challenges and learning that has to be done following decades of dictatorship, she also talked about the sort of serious reform of institutions and the legal reforms that are needed, and that there's sort of need for patience as many of these things are addressed. I fear that the Tunisian population has had sort of perhaps unrealistically high expectations, and that their patience is wearing thin. And so I would express some concern that the pace of the transition is not kind of meeting the expectations of Tunisia's people. With regard specifically to the human rights issues, broadly, I think there's sort of maybe two sets of broad concerns with regard to human rights. One is sort of the current condition right now during the transition, and the current, the degree to which human rights are currently protected. And then the other is, in the longer term, in the kind of, beyond the post-transition, what will sort of the permanent framework be for the protection of human rights. At the moment, I think there are concerns with the protection of human rights. I think it is clear that Tunisia is much freer in terms of the opportunity to express yourself politically. However, there's not complete confidence in your ability to do so, and the restrictions on human rights, and particularly freedom of expression, as well as sort of, you could say, academic freedom as well, are different now from what they were before the revolution. Before the revolution, certainly the fear was that if you spoke out, there would be immediate and clear and direct reprisal from the government. Now it seems to be fear of reprisal for political speech or for expression of academic freedom, not directly from the government, but by unknown actors, by independent actors, by groups or individuals that are seen as extremists and opposed to your speech or your political position, and a fear not that the government will target you directly, but that the government will not protect you from reprisals from other citizens. And there have been quite a number of instances in which there have been violence used, for politically motivated violence. In some of the universities, there's been violence used to sort of, enforce what are seen as sort of, conservative views of what's acceptable within the university. And there's a real fear that the government is not organizing or carrying out this sort of intimidation against freedom of speech or expression, but that they're failing to uphold this and failing to protect, and that there's a lack of confidence in sort of in accountability and upholding the law against private citizens who are taking action to kind of restrict the rights of others. In terms of the longer view, the expectations regarding kind of freedoms and rights under the Constitution, I think Amna sort of accurately detailed some of the ambiguities and loopholes that may exist. It's not that the current draft of the Constitution explicitly limits rights, as is the case in some of the other constitutions that have been put forth in other countries, but the protections are insufficient. And I think that the fears of the environment that will exist under this Constitution moving forward are exacerbated by the current environment during the transition, in which there's a feeling that the government is not upholding the law sufficiently, and that sort of exacerbates fears that moving forward, some of these loopholes or ambiguities that may exist in the Constitution may lead to serious problems. I think I'll leave my remarks there and turn to Joyce, and I'll look forward to having a discussion beyond this.
Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. I would just like to echo the comments made by Stephen. In my most recent visit, I found a lot of similarities in the things that you just described. My main purpose in presenting today is to kind of feedback the perspectives that I got while meeting with a broad cross-section across government, civil society, business leaders, and just feed that into an understanding of, yes, general context of how the transition has progressed, but also to flag some issues that could continue to feed into instability and unrest. Things kind of shape in my mind under three general categories. One being a feeling that there's a recognition that the government does attempt to listen, but there's often a lack of follow-up. And I heard this in numerous meetings that I had, and let me describe in a bit more detail. The issues that are based on popular demand that are coming up, issues of unemployment, frustration that the transitional justice law has yet to be passed, frustration and a lack of investment, frustration that the daily quality of life has not seemed to change, and that even possibility that the daily quality of life has actually lowered since the revolution, and the frustration that comes along with a higher price of education, a higher cost for daily goods. And that the government, while listening and often offering public hearings or being open to meetings with constituents, hasn't figured out how to formalize that feedback in a way that builds into some sort of sustainable change, either in the drafting of legislation or in improvements in the delivery of services, including unemployment benefits. And so that continued, the gap in the institutions that exist just exacerbates the total unrest and situation as a whole. The feeling was that the government has demonstrated on a case-by-case basis some examples where there was a willingness and openness and feedback from civil society organizations or everyday citizens. Some of the examples that were cited to me were, inviting civil society to take a lead role on different committees as advisors, bringing in youth to advise on issues of local governance, actually bringing in civil society groups to work with female prisoners in different instances. But in each way, it was very much based on case by case and often personality driven versus, figuring out how to coordinate feedback, these national level discussions which would feed into a more consultative and representative process, and instead is minimized into, having a connection or being able to talk to someone who's already on a committee or already involved in drafting legislation. And so just the frustration that arises from that. The second point would be the importance of dialogue in this institution building process. The average Tunisian that I ran into, Tunisia has an amazing, especially in Tunis, an amazing cafe culture, and people are out and they're talking politics, and it's the everyday discussion revolves around understanding there are these structural drivers of conflict, and a lot of issues are being exacerbated by the fact that there's no capacity to respond when issues arise. That's a frustration both on the part of members within the government that I met with, but also civil society groups, students, especially young people. And so there's a high level of relationship building and trust building that needs to occur at this point, because that ties into the third point that I'm about to make, which is about transparency and accountability and the importance of building trust when the government is perceived and opposition parties are perceived to lack that legitimacy and representation of your average citizen, kind of echoing the statements of Stephen earlier, especially when it comes to operating outside of the capital. And by that, I mean quite a few things. There are positive examples of where the government has engaged, not necessarily on a national level with enough time to build in a truly consultative process on the constitution-making process, or even in the drafting of the transitional justice law, which are seen largely as positive examples, but then things are thrown very quickly off pace when there is a failure for cases that involve the abuse of journalists to actually make it to court, or there's a feeling of deliberate blocking by both the Ministry of Interior and Ministry of Justice for 40+ cases of violence against journalists to actually come to the floor. Or things are completely thrown off base when we get to a discussion on transitional justice and reconciliation, and there's a feeling that with the military courts taking over any cases that involve a member of the security sector, that actually results in families feeling that there is actually no access to justice, and that there is a culture of impunity, and they have no other options or no other reach to take their claims. A big issue that I ran into on multiple levels was this frustration overall by youth and their lack of political voice and lack of opportunities in seeking higher education because of costs, obviously issues of unemployment, but I think largely this feeling that, and I heard this multiple times, we helped lead the revolution and now we don't have access to be representatives in government, we're excluded. We are told we don't have the wisdom or the connection with people to be able to represent their concerns, and yet we're the ones that are out as huge advocates and leaders within civil society, and we actually are at this point more in touch with the everyday Tunisian than most others. As it relates to civil society, I heard some major concerns in the blurring of lines between civil society and political parties, and this confusion of wanting to build an independent structure and civil society institution, and that means really sound organizations that are mission focused, that have clear funding, that are able to manage their resources, that are really dedicated to a specific mission, and having that confused and blurred with large-scale funding from political parties and political parties using civil society organizations as a front to further their mandate, platform, and mission. This was a frustration that was voiced actually within government as well as with civil society organizations who felt like we are at a point in the development of civil society in Tunisia where you have groups that are focused on delivery of services in some way, so delivery of projects, delivery of charity in some way, versus those that are focused on advocacy or awareness, and that there's a lack of the maturity of a lot of these organizations, maybe maturity is not the right word, a lack of understanding how advocacy or how a higher level of understanding the structures that are in existence, including decision makers, points of tension, the structures that they actually could feed into, how that would empower civil society to take a much stronger role in the transition as a whole. So I don't want to go into too much detail, even though I heard quite a few cases of everyday police brutality and this feeling of lack of community level security and personal safety, and how that all ties into larger scale unrest and this feeling that demonstrations will continue, protests will continue, this kind of physical confrontation will continue because there's no formalized system for feeding in demands, and demands, once they are fed in some way, whether that's a protest, whether that's a publication of an article, etc., are not being acknowledged anyways, and so it's just continuing to breed a lot of tension and frustration.
Terrific. That Joyce's remarks remind me, you heard the word capacity, for example. Often in the case of Tunisia, we see this elsewhere, when there is a lack of capacity, a lack of response. There's a lot of demand, but not often a lot of supply. And that is seen as intentional. That is to say, there are all kinds of explanations that are attached to that. Or the government hasn't responded, that must be part of a broader conspiracy or part of a broader agenda. We hear this all the time. When in fact, it's often a matter of institutional capacity, the capacity of governments to respond. And we are in love in the United States ever since Tocqueville came here with civil society. And civil society is the mechanism by which the demand is made. But then there's the question of supply, of the capacity, and that's really absolutely critical. In fact, lots of demand and no supply is a very bad recipe for instability. So I'm really struck, Joyce, by your remarks in that regard. Now, let me propose the following. Since Amel made some interesting remarks that I bet you'd like to respond to, why don't you spend just a couple of minutes doing precisely that, and then we'll open up the discussion. That way you can hear a little bit of what Amel has to say and perhaps even respond. And that will take us to roughly 11 o'clock, and then we can have a good 20 minutes or so, 25 minutes for discussion while you're still here, even. So, and then we'll have we'll phone you in from the train, if that's okay. All right, so Amel.
Okay. Thank you, Daniel, again. And let me first of all remind you that the 22nd of April's draft of constitution is but a draft. Mm-hmm. That means that still we have ahead of us a plenary session where, and right now I think, I think they have finished actually. So before we left Tunisia, we left the chief drafting committee, if you want, meeting with experts in constitutional law and in language, trying to, if you want, see if there are any redundancies, any, if you want, contradictions, any, how can I say, any loopholes at the level of formulation, composition, etc. So before this final draft is submitted to Mr. the President of the Republic, one copy, and another copy for Mr. The President of the NCA, another one for the Prime Minister for 2 weeks. It'll be there for 2 weeks, and then let's say by 20th of May or 22nd of May, I hope we'll start discussion, article by article discussion with a we need ratification of 50+1 for article by article, and we need also 2/3 for the whole of it, for the ratification of the whole of it. So we have still a lot of things to be done, a lot of changes, a lot of amendments to be done in this draft, in this third draft. That's just to begin with. Let me also add something else, which will be very important also to clarify things here, is that when we left also Tunisia, we left major participants, political participants in the political scene in Tunisia, sitting around a round table, if you want, trying to reach consensus around the most controversial, if you want, or the points of disagreement at the level of constitution and also at the political level. Let me just mention a few examples of those points discussed now, right now, and I think they have finished. I'm not sure. One of them is the political system, and the second point, for example, is the question of freedom of conscience. Another question is universalism and the question of universal laws, etc. Another question is the right to go on strike. Shall we state it unrestrained, or shall we also, following some comparative laws and comparative constitution, state this right in a way with some restraints, etc. So these are the points which are being discussed right now, and the aim, or if you want, the objective of all this is to facilitate things for the plenary session for the NCA, so that we go as soon as possible to the ratification of the Constitution from the first reading. That's the greatest objective. We need to ratify this Constitution from the first reading We hope we won't reach a referendum, a popular referendum. That's why these participants are trying to reach together a consensus. And my party, personally, we have done lots of concessions, and we continue to make concessions. And we know that these concessions, we make them, and we are aware that the interest, as Joyce, no, as Stephen maybe mentioned, that the interest of the country comes before anything else. Before anything else, we have this in our mind, but we have also convictions. On, let me start by one point, maybe, and there are so many points, but I'd like, I'll be choosing some of them. I leave maybe Mr. Badruddin is here. He's doing the same job as I am, so he'll be of great help in this vein. So, because Amel is leaving, I'll try to talk about points she mentioned, and then I'll be going back to what Stephen or what Joyce said. So, yes. Yes, she said there are compromises between Islamists and secularists, and there are diverging views about human rights here. The problem here is that as far as we in my party, in Nahda's party, understand Islam and understand religion, we understand it in a way that does not contradict universal laws. That's a reading, that's what we adopt in our thought. That is what Mr. Rashid Ghannouchi also keeps repeating in his books and in his thought. So Islam does not contrast the concept of the civil state. It does not concept, you know, when I was really astonished when I read in the invitation this sentence, it provoked me, in fact. Let me just, it says the following. I'm sorry to quote, where is it? It says, the constitution writing process has been protracted by disagreements about allusions to Islam and cultural values and the primacy of human rights as they are internationally defined. We, as far as we understand Islam, we don't see any contradiction between the way it is stated here, as if there is a real gap between universalism or universal values and the values in Islam. Let's say we do agree. It doesn't bother us. Universalism doesn't bother us. But I mean, the values, people understand Islam, or people who don't know Islam and religion understand it as just few prayers, as a scarf, as a way of dressing and fasting, and I don't know. But we are for a reading of Islam with its objectives. There are objectives of Islam, Islam that underlines great values such as freedom, equality, social justice. This is the core of Islam, and this is the core of this very constitution in front of us. That's why for us, we have no real problem in putting this and that in this constitution. This is number one. There is still another point I'd like to also underline is the cultural specificities, and we mentioned, Joyce mentioned also the question of the dialogue, the national dialogue. What is a constitution, in fact? What do you do when we write constitutions? Why do we listen to the others? So I know that constitutions, usually they are for values, human values, for equality, for all of these things that ensure freedom and human rights and equality and etc. But still a constitution is written in Tunisia. So if we listen to civil society, it means we listen to people from the left and from the right. It means if we have listened to more than 6,000 people in Tunisia, outside Tunisia and inside Tunisia, if we have listened to more than 300 civil society organizations and more than 160 experts, it's to listen to them, because all of these, they have something to add. So here, still I think, I've been going through many constitutions in the world, and they do respect human rights, but also they do respect some of their specificities. They do respect that. Now when I go back here, I can give the example of one example. Just a minute, please. Sorry, I'm getting a little bit lost. Okay, For example, let me go back to Amna before she leaves also. She said also, she mentioned the question of the freedom of conscience, etc. I take you back also to the way we think, the way we read religion and Islam. And the way also Mr. Rashid Ghannouchi has explained this fact, he was clear on this fact. Freedom of belief, freedom of conscience, freedom of thought. This is, we have no problem with this. In our Quran, we say, La ikraha fi din. There is no obligation in religion, no coercion in religion. And it is on this very verse that we have no problem mentioning the question of freedom of conscience or freedom of belief or freedom of thought in this constitution. Mr. Ghannouchi defends the freedom of people to either adhere or defect from a religious creed based on the Quranic verse that says there is no compulsion in religion. La ikraha fi din. Freedom is the primary value through which a person adheres to Islam. Islam has no meaning without this freedom. Liberty is a major objective in Islam. We do not fear from Islam. What we fear is dictatorship. What we fear is dictatorship because we do believe that Islam thrives in the atmosphere of freedom. It thrives in the atmosphere of freedom. So what we need is freedom. Now, let me just go back also to the question of international conventions. Amel said there is no article stating Tunisia opposes international conventions. I think there is also something in these international conventions which says states have the right either to adopt all of these or to refuse or reject or to have reserves. All the countries in the world, they have the right and the choice to choose to accept all of them or to refute or to reject or to make few reserves. In the States, there are reserves. Everywhere there are reserves on these. Now the problem, Amna, in Tunisia is that there was something that happened. It's very odd and very, very bizarre. Exactly on the 24th of October, 2011, before it means one day after the results of the elections, after the results of the election, what happened? The interim government withdrew all the reserves made by the previous states of Tunisia without referring back to any. These things need dialogue. They need an authority, if you want, a representative, a parliament that would discuss this. We need to discuss them. So nobody, they have asked nobody. They have gone back to no institution that represents people. They have asked no dialogue to see if people really demand or need to retreat or to withdraw all these reserves or not. That's the problem. We are not against conventions, but we are for a transparency in dealing with these conventions. We need them to be discussed and treated by a legitimate institution, that is the NCA probably, or even to another, if you want, established, probably the next established parliament to discuss such points. These are few points. Maybe Mr. Badruddin would like to intervene on others if possible, but I have many other points on the security level. I'd like to talk on the problem of violence because it needs to be discussed here, right here, and we need to update many things about this problem, okay, and the socio-economic also point. Okay.
I'm going to very quickly that I know we'll want to open it up and
there are
have
some
our
few
colleagues.
things that I need to also comment on. Thank you very much, Mrs. Amel Azzouz. I think this is very valuable comments about the perspective from your point of view and from the point of view also of the party about the constitutional drafting process, the fact that there were several improvements in this draft, that it's still prone for improvement and for discussion in the future. But let me go back though to one of the points you were making. I mean, I noticed throughout your comments on my presentation that you were referring very much to Mr. Rashid Ghannouchi and to his books on Islam and human rights. Of course, if the drafters or the drafters of future legislation in Tunisia and the future judges in Tunisia are obliged to go back to the books of Rashid al-Ghannouchi to understand the meaning of what Islam as a religion of the state is, then I'm fine with that. But the problem is that there are several other interpretations of Islam. There are several other books about Islam and human rights which are in contradiction with this very meaning of human rights. So, of course, if you want to limit and put Rashid Ghannouchi's books as a means of interpretation in the constitution, that's fine. But if we want to have a serious discussion about what the meaning of these words are, let's also try to understand that you are not as a Nahda. Of course, a Nahda has maybe in theory and also in practice, well, you are in the power since not long, so we don't know exactly what the practice on human rights will be. But still, if we take the premise, or if we start from the premise that this constitution is for future generations, that this constitution might be read by other people than a Nahda who are now, let's say, the majoritarian party in the Constituent Assembly and in the government. This is the main problem. In theory, there is no contradiction. In theory, you can dovetail and very much understand and harmonize between the different, interpretations and say that Islam and human rights. I totally agree that, and I very much advocate for the existence of a total harmony in some understanding and some interpretations of Islam. But let's not overlook the fact that there are various interpretations which are totally opposed to the harmony between Islam and human rights. And you know what I'm referring to. There are several countries which are applying Sharia law, which are applying harsh, interpretations contrary to freedom of conscience, contrary to freedom of expression, contrary to women's rights, etc. So that's my just some of the elements I wanted to. But one final point on the international conventions, because obviously when Tunisia ratifies an international convention, it doesn't surrender its sovereignty or its free will. An international convention which is ratified is something which comes from the free will of the people, let's say, in a democratic society, of course, and which are, it's a convention which is not surrendering to the international community. And you said that there are in all countries of the world, you can make reservations, etc. Yes, you can make reservations, but these are reservations at the international level. Once you adopt a convention, once you ratify a convention, this convention becomes compulsory. If you want to make other reservations, you have to go back to the international level and say, well, I want to make this and this reservation, or I want to withdraw from this and this convention. But you cannot in a general, in a total, like very vague way, say that the conventions will be applied if they are not in contradiction with the constitution, because that's not something which it's no more, but it's no more, it's true, but it doesn't state clearly that the conventions which are ratified are upheld and are compulsory as part of the law of the land in Tunisia. And there are many constitutions which say exactly the same, even the Moroccan constitution. Let's not go to other, like very other parts of the world. That's me.
Okay, can I interrupt?
Yes, yes.
Just to interact a little bit with you, Amna, article number 15 in the second draft used to say that we cannot accept or ratify any conventions unless they, if you want, go with, or how can I say, unless they are, they do not contradict, how can I say, the Constitution? Yes, but it's no more that. Now, you mentioned that, in fact, in one of your communique. We mentioned clearly something that is, the Constitution is the highest document, and then we have the conventions, the international convention, and then the Tunisian law. So I think that's clear enough on this point. We do not fear. I understand the fears you have, but I think the whole, if you read, and you've been stressing the fact that we should read the Constitution in its globality, in its totality, you'll find in the preamble things that would make us accept our belonging to this world. So I have no fears on this point. Just to I've been, I wanted to, sorry. Yes, the question of, you said, the interpretation of this. All of us know that the majority of Tunisians are moderate people. The majority of them refuse violence, refuse extremism. Extremism is, if you want, how can I say, it's not even an exception, it's unacceptable, okay? So in Tunisia, this is the people we have always been and we continue to be. So that's I mean, another thought is, I can say, a gathering, is a way of a party in the middle, trying to gather people rather than, and we need to gather people in this constitution. I think the thought, why I've been mentioning the thought of Nahda and thought of Mr. Rashid Ghannouchi, because people say we are now the majority in the parliament and we are the majority, if you want, drafting this constitution now, and we are supposed to be responsible of what's taking place and what is in this constitution. So I've been underlying this in order to give you this feeling that nowadays, if people trusted us at a given moment, it's because of what we represent, okay? And the second point is the question of the civic state now. Why are you all the time in this constitution trying to, if you want, strip the constitution from any notion to Islam, any notion to Islam? So when I said Islam and the civic state do not contradict, I mean, if you put in article number 1, Islam is its religion, and in article number 2, that it is a civic state, it doesn't contravene with that. So there are, and there is at the end of the constitution also an article which says this constitution should be read in its globality, So the Islamic rules and legislation came to limit the ruler's authority and submit it to law. So as far as we can see, this article number 2 is a guarantee that for any interpreter, if you want, you've been afraid that maybe extremists from the right, we are afraid also of extremists of the left. We should understand people. We have been listening to a dialogue, a whole dialogue. In Tunisia, we do not only have people who believe in the secular state, we have people also who believe in the civil state, but they are also very much influenced by Islam, and we've been listening to them. What shall we do with them? They are 99% of people are Muslims. They've been for a long time influenced by this religion. What can we say? What can we say? What can we say to them? So can we listen to some part and refute the others? They would like to see in article number 1, Islam is the religion of this country. We can't listen to them?
Article number 1 is not the problem here, because there was a consensus on Islam as the religion of the country. I mean, that's not, I made it very clear, I think, in my comments, the fact that Article 1, which was the subject of a consensus between the different forces in Tunisia and political parties with various leanings and ideological leanings, have agreed that this article should remain and that they have no problem with that. But then it's transformed, or the balance between the meaning, meaning of this article was transformed at the end by reference to Islam as the religion of the state. That's what the main, and to be honest, I mean, it's not that there is a problem with that. The problem is that it could, there will be more strength in the constitution if there is a clause which says that the interpretation of human rights should, I mean, the interpretation of Islam as a religion of the state or references to Islam will not be read in contradiction with the interpretation of human rights.
You mean, you understand this article as being, for example, it may turn the state into a theocracy?
I mean, it can be, because if you say Islam is the religion of the state, first of all, it's, yes, Article 136.
Yes, I said. But if we see, for example, article number, let me see, 6, I think, or 5, the state 5. The state sponsors religion, guarantees freedom of belief and religious rituals. So here, what's the role of the state, in fact? So today, does this mean that it will impose beliefs on people? No. It means taking care, for example, of, let's take the example, I always give this example, the example of the Jewish minority in Tunisia. The Jewish minority in Tunisia, they've been obliged for long, long years to bring their books from abroad, for example, from Israel, I think, or from, so now if the state Spencer's religion, it take care, it will photocopy their books, it will prepare them their books. This is taking care. It takes care of what's going on in the organization of mosques, for example, so that it won't be open just to anyone like that, to extremism. So that's how we see Spencering, how we see the role of the state. It doesn't mean we are establishing a theocratic state here. So the state is there, but we have our institutions that would protect Islam. Our civil society would take care of Islam. So it's not the state with its role, the way people imagine that state. So I think we've been discussing that a lot of time with experts and even with people from civil society. And unless we say, okay, this is not a constitution of Muslim people in Tunisia. We have to change people, all of them, and bring other people there. So what can we say?
It has nothing to do with
Yes.
Tunisian beliefs, or I mean Tunisian beliefs and Tunisian belief, and the fact that they are Muslims and that the majority of them is Muslim is encompassed by human rights also, because the freedom, if you say freedom of belief, then it means like each one has his own belief and each one upholds the belief he wants, and it's already something which is laid out very much in the constitution, in the preamble, in some of the articles that are there. So I didn't see why there is an additional layer of Islamism in the constitution that at the end could be interpreted in a way which is contradictory with human rights. That's my point. It's not about opposing the fact that there are references to Islam or to the Islamic religion. That's something which is a call and a demand of many people, that I understand that this is very, very important. Mm-hmm. There is a mention of it in Article 1 of the Constitution. It says that its religion is the state, its religion is Islam. Mm-hmm. So there is no real need for adding another layer,
yes, I understand.
In the end, by saying that the religion of the state is Islam. That's my point. And that,
yes,
that's the loophole, or that the vague wording of this article could lead.
Anyway,
I'm still,
as I've already mentioned, now the final draft is between the hands of experts, really, and they would judge if this could be, for example, a real problem of interpretation in the future. They would judge it before we get it to the, they would, of course, mention that before we get it in the plenary session. But I'm sure that it is between secure hands, between good hands now at this moment.
Thank you.
We're not stopping, by the way. Amna, you're just going to get your cab, and we can certainly stay for a little bit more longer. We own this room, so we're not going anywhere.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much. And I also wish to point out that certainly, yes, I just want to quickly say that in terms of the wording of our invite, we are certainly not taking any position on the outcome of this debate. Yes. We are here to facilitate the dialogue, yes, and we are not here to impose and moderate the dialogue. Yes. And it's been a very interesting dialogue so far. So our colleague from Nahda, would you like to? ما عندناش وقت كتير دلوقتي عندك صح وممكن تقعد هنا.
He has no translation.
That's our problem. It's okay. Well, let's open up the discussion to our colleagues in the audience. There's a microphone here. I think that we would prefer if you just came up to the mic and
translate for you if you want.
And questions, please, short questions. No constitutional amendments whatsoever will be tabled this afternoon.
Is it on?
Yes.
Okay. First of all, thank you for a very lively discussion. My name is Ali Abu Zakouk. I'm from Citizenship Forum for Democracy from Libya. So I'm next door. We are looking really with keen eyes and insight in the development of Tunisia, because we are hoping to get some lessons from it in our process also. Amel, you said something very interesting, because I think needs to be given some more elaboration. You said the challenge of the deep state.
Yes.
This is, I think, something that I need you to elaborate upon.
Okay.
Who are the actors of the deep state?
Okay.
That's one. And if you allow me, the challenges of the judiciary. I have followed out that there was an attempt to reform the judiciary,
Yes.
but there is a great challenge of it. And I don't want to add a third one because that's enough. Thank you.
Okay.
Enough for a conference question.
One more one?
Yeah, you can take both very quickly, but we're only going to have to, we can only provide quick answers to tough questions.
You know that, as I have mentioned earlier, that this happened in all revolutions, I think. So people who've been ruling for a long time, they won't just give up all of a sudden. Okay, they'll be taking strong hold of their positions. And the choice that the ruling people now, the government ruling Tunisia now, is that it's impossible that you come all of a sudden and you change in blocks. It's impossible. For the continuity of the state, you need these people. But these people, they've been, in a way or another, involved in corruption and involved with the old regime in a way or another. So that's a very difficult equation. So how can we, at the same time, keep the state go with all the administration and etc., and at the same time keep going by not, if you want, yes. How can we say إعفاء Mr. Masmoudi, إخراجهم وإعفائهم? By excluding, it's a choice. Shall we exclude them in blocks and leave the state in vacancy, or shall we keep them? And in that case, we have great problems of your policy. Can you implement the policies you have chosen? Can you, if you want, enforce law? And you have an instrument that has always been corrupted in the hands of the dictator. That's a big question. So the choice, I think, in Tunisia is that it's impossible that we get rid and we exclude those people. We have chosen the great, if you want, accused people, accused of, but the others, there are hundreds of them. So the problem is that now, I have listened to Joyce, Sir or Steve, I forgot, who mentioned that now people, they complain. They say, why do you arrest people? We see the security arresting people, and tomorrow, for example, the following day, they release them. So what's happening? Is this government against reform? No, it's not against reform. But there are still many other people very well positioned in the administration, either central or local administrations, and they are hindering, we say hindering and hampering, yes, hindering the work of the new state, okay? They are hampering the implementation of the new policies, and that's a real problem for this arising democracy. It's a real problem. As far as I can see, with the, inshallah, with the law of transitional justice, we would have gone steps further in getting rid of many of these people, either in the judicial or in the police, in the security system, but this takes time. I said from the beginning, it's not easy work. You are in front of a very hard equation, and we have opted to keep the state going by not, if you want, cleansing, a sort of total, we say cleansing, yes, total cleansing of the old regime, but we are doing this progressively. It has drawbacks, of course, that's sure, but sometimes you have no choice, yes. The problem, one of the great mistakes is that we didn't start with the transitional justice. Yes.
Thank you very much. My name is Monsef Bouhafa. I'm a Tunisian living here in Washington, or sometimes an American living in Tunisia. Thank you very much for making the trip and coming here. I think we need more of these kinds of forum, even if they're attended only by a few hundred people. In this country, we don't get a lot of news coverage about Tunisia and what's really going on. I have two questions. The first one, Article 34 of the Constitution guarantees the right to access information, but doesn't mention anything about freedom of the press. And then it says that access to information is guaranteed if it does not compromise national security, which is understandable, or it says
could
general
you
interests.
slow down, please, Elizabeth? Could you slow down?
Or
The second
general
point.
interests.
The second point, please.
Yeah, the second one, intérêt général. Et garantie à condition de ne pas compromettre la sécurité
No, just give
nationale
me
ou
give me the number.
34.
Okay?
No,
Article 34. I'm just wondering, how do you propose to define the general interests? Because that is a concept that I think I would have difficulty defining in the United States, quite frankly, around, for example, gun control. I wouldn't know what the general interest is.
Okay.
90% of the people favor one thing. Do you do that on the basis of polling? Well, so that's my first question. The second question I have is you mentioned something about, you said that transitions take time, and then you said that there's a need to change mentalities.
Yes.
So I'd like to know
Yes.
whose mentalities in Tunisia need to be changed and who's going to do the changing. Because to my mind, that's not a concept that you often hear
Yes.
in a democracy like
Yes,
the
I'll
United
explain.
States.
I'll
You don't
explain.
hear Obama say we need to change
No,
mentalities.
I'll
So I'm
explain.
just curious
Yes.
about that.
Yes.
Okay?
Okay.
Last
That's a good question.
You know,
Joyce.
we
Yeah,
have,
just one
we
last
have,
one. Joyce and Steve, you can answer this if you want to, if there's time, right? What's the metric that you use when you visit Tunisia or any other country to make statements like there's no legitimacy for the government or people are frustrated? How do you do that? I visit Tunisia and I see a lot of people, and quite frankly, I can never say that when I come home, except to my wife and children. So I'm just curious how these stereotypical impressions get generated. I don't disagree with that, but what is the metric you use to come back and make statements like that?
Okay.
great questions. Not much time. I was reminded, Steve, that
Yes.
you have to be leaving
Yeah,
in
they're
about
very
6
brief.
minutes, right?
Daniel,
You have
I'll be
you have
very
it,
brief
right?
on the second question, Monsieur Mansouf, Mr. Mansouf. Happy to meet you and nice to meet you. So what I meant, maybe I've chosen the right notion or the right concept or the right word. Maybe it's not strange to use it in Tunisia, but it seems a little bit strange. What I meant exactly is that in Tunisia nowadays, it's true we are establishing a new republic, a new state through this constitution. But is it enough? That's a question I've asked at the beginning. Is it enough that we write a constitution, we establish a legislation, but we need also to work on, let's say the notion of, or the concept of citizenship, for example. Citizenship. Is it enough to come and to state in this constitution, Tunisia is a civil state based on citizenship and etc. You need to work on education and culture and etc. in order so that people understand really. These people have never known what's the meaning of citizenship, what's the meaning of accepting you are different from me and I accept you whatever was your ideology or your race or your religion or so we have not known things like that. We need to work on legislation and we need to work on ways and mechanics, if you want, of changing people's way of looking at this text. Okay, so you have to work on two levels, on many levels sometimes. This is what I meant by mentality. The second is Mr. Badruddin is going to answer you in Arabic. You understand Arabic, I think, but I'll try to translate a little bit to the others. Okay, yes, go on. Yes, article, yes. Yes.
شكرا. لو ما فهمت جيدا السؤال المتعلق بالفصل 34 يعني حدود النفاذ للمعلومة لماذا وقع ضبطها تقييدها؟ مصلحة طبعا هي
Yes. The public interest? Yes, I see.
طبعا هو فقط أي لا فقط هو كل ما يتعلق بالدستور ديما يجي يعني عام وكل ما يتعلق بالتدقيقات بطبيعة الحال قانون عادة أغلبية الفصول تكون مذيلة ويضبطه قانون بطبيعة الحال كي تذكر على إطلاقها المصلحة العامة هذه ما يحددها القانون. أيضا المعطيات الشخصية للغير بطبيعة الحال لازم تكون أكثر
the gist of your answer is that it has to be the law that defines what this means. It's going to be established according to law. It is. My own sense is that among the various elements of the Constitution, this may be one of the most problematic.
Anyway, let me just tell you, Mr. Monsef, that this second, how can I say, الباب الثاني, the second chapter number 2. Is it chapter number 234? Yes, chapter number 2. Yes, rights and freedoms. I do not belong to that, to be precise. To be honest with you, I cannot really give you feedback on this particular point. So maybe I can just write down your notes and tell them to, yes. I understand your worry, exactly, I understand.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. Deputies. Yes, yes, yes.
I've never heard, I voted in the election 2 years ago.
Yeah.
I've never heard one email, one phone call from the person that I voted for or the person that represents me.
Ah, okay.
On the registry of the embassy, easy to find.
Okay, thank you. You know, it is.
Okay.
It is worth keeping in mind that, as far as I can tell, every authoritarian constitution that I know has this kind of loophole, because ultimately it becomes the government that defines what interests are, and that can be the opening to a very serious debilitation of rights. So that's something that, but the extraordinary thing we know and we heard today is that this is a process of discussion and debate and negotiation. The interesting thing about Tunisia, in contrast to Egypt, is in Egypt the entire debate was arbitrated and manipulated by the military, to put it frankly. In Tunisia, the various sides either talk or they fight. They really don't have anywhere else to go. And we can see this process unfolding, and it's an extraordinary one. And I think that we were very lucky to have the opportunity to have such an open and frank debate. And we will continue to do what we can to offer our good services and our institution to promote that debate as you move along to pushing this arduous process of creating a new constitution to its fruition. I'm sorry we're going to have to cut off the discussion now because our colleague must hop into a cab and get to her next meeting. So thank you very much to everybody.
Thank you very much, Daniel.
Thank you. I will see you
You've
when
been
I come
great,
to
really, yes. Yes. Yes, please.